I'll let you introduce yourselves, and then what I'd like you to do is talk a little bit about the key initiative that you're talking about in the context of what I've just sort of laid out, this broad landscape. So if we can start with you, Sebastian, maybe if you can introduce yourself and then tell us a little bit about your journey from somebody who's an entrepreneur to being much more involved in sort of the role of capital in changing this information landscape.
Sure. So my name is Sebastian Klein, and I'm a media entrepreneur. So 12 years ago, I founded a company called Blinkist, which is a book summary service and a very profit-oriented media startup with very classical venture capital money. It was acquired last year, so we had an exit. And the last 5 years, I built a purpose-driven steward-owned media organization, which is not funded with venture capital and not exit-oriented, and more trying to be part of the journalistic media landscape and trying to have a positive impact on society. And then with Blinkist, of course, we also say we want to have a positive impact on society, but if you look at the way the company is financed and funded and who has control over it, the actual impact that wants to be created is more capital. I think that's the truth with a lot of impact venture capital, that the impact that wants to be created is just take €1 and make €2 out of it. What I find important is if I compare these two worlds, like the classical startup ecosystem, I'm in Berlin, so I look at this, and then the purpose-driven media and journalistic landscape. In the classical startup landscape, we have about 5 billion venture capital invested every year just in Berlin, and the small purpose-driven media organizations, for them we have maybe €1 million of funding per year, so next to nothing. And at the same time, as you pointed out, we have all these problems, and everyone expects these small journalistic media organizations to compete with companies that are funded with billions. Like, this is what I see, that we have these small media organizations who want to create a positive impact, and they're competing with companies who have billions, if not trillions, in funding. And I think that's not going to work. So what my perspective is that we need a different kind of capital, or we need more capital in the first place to fund these media organizations if we want to have a healthy media landscape and healthy journalism. But we need a different kind of capital, like the old school venture capital that is, in my views, extractive. So it invests money, but in the end it wants to take more out than it then brings to the organization. That's not really helpful. I think we need capital that wants to support these organizations. And if I look, for me, if I look at capital, we have a lot of capital in the world. That's partly the result of this profit-driven part of the economy that I just described. And if I look at capital in general, for me, it's a spectrum between philanthropic capital. So I give away, and there's different kinds of philanthropic capital, but for me, it's just I give away money, I want to create impact, and I don't get any money back. And then at the other end of the spectrum, I have extractive capital, which wants to extract as much value as possible. So there you have private equity, venture capital. And I think that journalistic media organizations need only that half of the spectrum. So from philanthropic to maybe small profits, like the inflation, 3% or so. So because Blinkist was sold last year, so I ended up having some capital, and I got the impression now I'm part of the problem, because if I keep investing in the old way, then I'm just perpetuating the problems we have. And I tried to be more part of the solution, so I took all my capital, or 90% of my capital, put it into an organization called Karma Capital, and what we're doing is focusing on this part of the spectrum. So we have some philanthropic capital, but we also invest in journalistic organizations, but always with this idea of we don't want high returns, we don't want control, and we have a long-term perspective. With the philanthropic capital, we're also supporting the Media Forward Fund, which I won't describe because I think you're going to do that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Now, Maribel, if you could introduce yourself and then explain a little bit about your work and the origin of the capital that you're working with, and how that has, what role that plays in society, and why you as an organization have decided that journalism as a sort of key thing that you want to influence and impact.
Thanks. Yeah, my name is Maribel Königer. I'm responsible at Erste Foundation for, on one hand, communications. I have two functions, and I'm responsible for the journalism and media projects in the foundation. What is Erste Foundation? For those who don't know, we are the core shareholder of Austria's biggest bank in the stock list, Erste Group. And in this relationship, this is a savings bank foundation law that is regulating us. We are spending parts of the dividends that we get from our share of our bank in the region where the money was earned. And as this is an international group, mainly active in Central Austria, but also in Central and Southeastern Europe, we are doing projects for the common good in this region. And not only, by the way, in countries where there is an Erste subsidiary, so also it's the region, it's not in Africa, not in Latin America, it's CEE, so including Austria. From day one, we supported journalism, and we did it with an investment into people, means into journalists. So we set up a fellowship for Balkan Fellowship for Journalistic Excellence was the name, together with an organization based in the Balkans, the Balkan Investigative Reporting Network, BIRN. Because why only in the Balkans and not, for example, in Czech Republic or in our neighboring countries, where we also do, from day one, did cultural projects and the projects of our other programs, because we thought this will be all good. They are members of the European Union anyways, and this will develop smoothly. After several years, with a very successful fellowship and capacity building in the journalists, we realized that around us, things are developing not so well in the media landscape. In our neighboring capital, Bratislava, a journalist was shot with his fiancée, and you know all the situations that is still not good in Hungary, might be better now in Poland, is becoming again worse in Slovakia, and is so in Czech Republic. I mean, actually better. And from that moment on, we realized, okay, we have to widen the angle. So it's not just about Balkan journalism, but really Central and Southeastern Europe. And we also realized that capacity building for journalists is fine. But if they have nothing to publish in, what does this help? So media came into the focus, and I keep this shorter because maybe we can discuss later a bit more in detail about that. So we first invested into a pooled fund of European foundations based in Brussels called Civitatis, who is investing into innovative or also kind of startup media in the European Union in this case, but with a focus on countries like Eastern European countries or Southern European countries who need support. And recently, only in last year, we did something completely new. We invested as an impact investor, fits very well to the Impact Days, into Pluralis, which is actually a fund set up to pool again money, but as an investment. So we bought shares there to invest into publishing houses in Eastern Europe. So, and this is to keep them safe from media capture. Media capture is, you might know it, so unwanted influences into media, or either to close them, whatever, if the oligarch comes around the corner and buys it, change the narrative, etc. So this was, until recently, our investment into media and journalism. Until yesterday we decided, and I also leave the detailed explanation to Martin, also to invest into a fund that includes now also Austria, because as I said, Civitatis and Pluralis are mainly investing. They are open to Civitatis to countries of the European Union, Pluralis to the countries of the European Council, bigger. But with the money they have, they focus at the beginning, of course, on countries that are more in the focus than, for example, the German-speaking countries, Austria, Germany, and Switzerland. And finally, the question that you ask, why journalism? Why this? There is a quote that I want to tell you from the CEO of the MacArthur Foundation, John Palfrey, who told everyone, and they are a foundation who have funding journalism and media as a mission, they are really focusing on that mainly. I think some other things, but this is the main purpose they have as a foundation. But he once said that whatever you are funding as a philanthropic organization, as a foundation, in the first place, be it you are working with children, with education, with social impact and social inclusion, whatever you do, or financial health, we have also this program. So you should have journalism and media as a second topic. Because you need a functioning media environment and actually a functioning public discourse. This is what we are all talking about, with platforms where fact-based journalism is possible, to make a larger audience understandable. What else are you doing? So it doesn't help if you are super focused on other topics, if you are finally end up alone in your bubble and cannot transmit the goals that you have with your other topics. So a vital media landscape and functioning journalism is important for democracies, for us all, but actually also for philanthropies. And by the way, even for commercial enterprises. I'm often asked, what is the benefit for the bank? I always answer, for whatever we fund, by the way, and I always answer, there is no direct, we are not the sponsoring department of Erste Group. They have their own sponsoring department. Also, each subsidiary bank has their own sponsoring department in the region. But nevertheless, it is a vital interest of every company to have a solid, on the state of law based environment where they can do their business. Otherwise, their clients would not take a mortgage or whatever. So that's not our hidden agenda, but it's also a fact. Everyone needs functioning media and journalism, independent journalism.
Thank you. So one of the things you talked about a little bit, I mean, there are philanthropies, as we've heard, who are intervening in countries and at the country level, but there are also European initiatives that are trying to kind of work across multiple countries in the European Union and also in the wider C of E region. But one of the things that I found in my work is that actually what has started to emerge, and partly inspired by work that's been done in the US, but also in other places, is that funders in regions, like small regions, sub-regions, or at the national level are starting to get organized. And they're starting to think, okay, we, in our own country, need to start thinking about this. We can't just rely on the European level. We can't just rely on sort of individual philanthropies getting involved. We need something more structural. So with that, Martin, could you talk a little bit about the new initiative that you debuted yesterday, I believe?
Sure. Well, thank you.
And introduce yourself as well.
Okay, well, I'm Martin. I've been a journalist forever, and I've been running news organizations for the last 9 years in Germany and Austria. And just yesterday we announced this new Media Forward Fund, that's the name, and I'm going to run this fund. And it's really created out of the real problem which is kind of going on in the media industry right now. You can see how it's struggling. You can see how newsrooms are being closed down, or there are cuts every time you read the news. And there's also a big trust issue with journalism as well. And these foundations who are behind this fund were really worried about this development in journalism, but by that they were also really worried what's going on in our democracies, because journalism is one of the key pillars of our democracy, and it's struggling. Both of them are struggling. And so these foundations, they have been doing their journalism programs for quite a while, each of them individually. But now they realized we have to really make a bigger impact. We need to pool our funds together to create this fund, which is active in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland, in 3 countries. And now it's 8 foundations and 1 impact investor who have been starting this. And it's also meant as a service to those who are not so much involved in the journalism and media industry. They might have the knowledge that there has something to be done, but they lack the knowledge where and how to support media, because it's a very complicated topic. It's political. It's also very risky, because if one of the news organizations make an error, you as a funder, you are kind of in a spotlight. So it's not as it's a more risky topic than funding maybe other areas. So this fund wants to lower this risk, because there are people who have been funding journalism for quite a while. They know the industry, and you can be part of this pool. So you can pool the money together with experts in the field, and then support news organizations and founders in these regions, and learn what's going on, how you actually fund that, how you invest in journalism. There's also an alignment, which is the option that Sebastian is using. You can be part of the philanthropic pool by supporting news organizations philanthropically. And by that, as an impact investor, you get to know them. You get to know the teams, their business models. You can mentor them. And by that, you have a much more informed decision later on if you want to decide if you want to actually make an investment into one of the grantees. So there's for 2 years there is support for these organizations, and then at some point there is the decision for what's going on after that. And then you, as an impact investor who has been involved in the fund, you know them, you know how it's going, which options they have in the future, and then you make a much easier decision maybe to invest in them later on.
So can we talk a little bit about that? About Media Forward. So how much money at the moment? What's the amount that you're launching with, and what's the ambition in terms of growth, in terms of the capital pool, and what's the rollout over that sort of initial 2-year period? And can you talk a little bit about what the actual focus is? Because obviously there are many things that you could do. There are many challenges in the journalism sector that you could choose to address. So in this sort of initial period, what's the focus? What effects are you hoping to see in the ecosystem that you think will then give you both a feeling that you're succeeding as a fund, but also that will offer sort of entry points to others or whatever? Can you just talk a bit through that?
Well, the fund is inspired by Press Forward, which is an initiative in the United States where 22 foundations came together to pool $500 million. $500 million, yes.
Okay.
$500 million, yes.
Just checking.
And they're just trying to start $1 billion now. And so this is, of course, this is the US, but this is something we were really inspired by. And so we want to pool funds in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland first, and then maybe expand to other countries. And for the start, it's 8 foundations which bring together 5.5 million euros, and I hope it's going to grow. Our plan is 25 million euros.
Just for DACH?
For DACH, yes.
Yeah.
DACH means Germany, Austria, Switzerland.
Sorry.
And for the second question, when it comes to the ticket sizes for grantees, we decided to fund after the idea phase. So grantees need to have already kind of a proof of concept. They need to show that there is some demand in the market, because for the first stage, for the early stage, thankfully, there are already enough support options like stipends and the media initiative by the city of Vienna, for example. But then there is the problem, because then you have found your market, you know your product, but then you have to expand, you have to really professionalize. to be able to go to the capital market. And that's where the fund comes in, to bridge this gap and to help them grow. And so we decided to fund not a huge number, but a more smaller number, but with larger tickets. And it's for one organization, it's 400,000 euros. And if you are a large news organization, if you have more than 30 employees, it will be 200,000 euros. And you have to co-finance, it's 50-50, so it's again 400,000 at the end. When it comes to the focus areas, it's really about business, it's about becoming a viable business model, because we have a lack of viable business models in media. It's still so much dependent on print, and the idea is to help these news organizations, these founders, to use the money to actually experiment on the market with business model that maybe no one has tried before. Yesterday I've talked to a founder who was approached by live theater, if they can write theater documentaries about real life events, like René Benko, who has been an investor and failed. And they were really successful with that, but they need someone to actually create this business for them, to make it into a profitable business arm, so that can support their investigative journalism, which is at the core of their news organization. But they can't afford to invest this money. So that would be something the fund would offer them, to create this completely new business model, which no one has been tried so far, as far as I know. And let's see, after 2 years, maybe that's a viable option. And then the whole market would profit, because someone has tried it with philanthropic money, and others can just copy it.
I would jump on this philanthropic money, and someone tries it and some other one can hop on it. Philanthropic money is risk money. This is what this is all about. So this is also why we didn't want to invest directly into media on a long-term relationship situation, endless funding to make someone survive. But the idea is always to put money in something that, for example, public money wouldn't invest in, because it's not possible. And then if it's proved to work, either it's a sustainable business model, or even if public money comes into the game, because this is also another question, it could be also of public interest to fund certain types of journalism, like public broadcasters, they are known. So this is why also we as a foundation put money into it. That was just.
I mean, do you want to talk about, obviously you're coming, as Martin is saying, Sebastian, you're coming from a different perspective and a different set of expertise. So when you look at that, what led you to think, okay, that's a good vehicle through which you want to also, what are your incentives for getting involved, and what are your hopes for that, for Media Forward, and what it will stimulate in the ecosystem?
I think that these two types of capital can work together well, because if a media organization has a risky business idea and wants to fund it just with investors' money, then it's typically where investors say, I want a high return because it's so risky. But this type of money is not helpful for the organization, because they will never be able to pay back the high, or if they can, then it's not going to be a healthy organization, or they have this mission drift towards profit maximization. So I think bringing these two kinds of capital together is good. I mean, it could be good from a greedy perspective, that I, as investors, say, great, they get free money from philanthropists, so I can reap all the profits. But I think if you come from a more impact-driven investor's perspective and say, well, then I can offer them better conditions, so it's also cheaper for them to take investors' money, I think it can be quite powerful.
I mean, the greedy money is part of Pluralis. So in the paradigm of Pluralis, which is a blended finance structure.
Exactly. I mean, there are foundations in Pluralis, Moog Foundation, for example. They invest they give donations, so they invest philanthropic money that they don't want back, to secure actually the blended capital. We didn't do it this time like that, because we always usually do this fund as a foundation, so the money is gone and hopefully something perfect comes out at the end. But in this case, we were an impact investor with hope of, yeah.
So did you, in Pluralis, the size of your, are you allowed to talk about the size of the investment?
You can,
Yeah.
2.5 million.
Okay, and then what's the expected rate of return that you have roughly on that? Because I know that the different tier, you know, like you say, there's, in a blended finance vehicle, I'm sure many of you know, but so the philanthropic money would go in, and as Maribel was saying, there'd be no expectation of return. Then you'd have sort of impacted investors who were looking for a different rate, and then the remainder, you know, it allows them to sort of bring in larger scale, you know, more retail-oriented investors or whatever, who then can expect a market or above market rate of return potentially, which in the media sector is not something that's usually there. You know, it's very much more risky, as everyone's sort of saying. So what in?
No, actually, the return expected, or the narrative for the investors was 4% on 10 years investment, which is already a quite long perspective for a usual investor. But in the end, for everyone who invested, it's clear that these 10 years are a flexible amount of time, because all of us who are invested, and Pluralis is not only called Pluralis because its goal is media pluralism in Europe, but also because there's really a plurality of investors, not only foundations, but also media houses, for example, big media houses, so the Norwegian media house Schibsted, or actually the foundation, similar to us, Schibsted, and Media House from Belgium. And they are, of course, I mean, we, the foundations who are invested with shares, we could accept that in the end it was risk money. And I mean, for us, we want to invest for the goal mainly, but it's also impact investment. We are interested to protect at least our investment. But the media organizations have an interest in really maybe getting something back, or at least protecting also the investment. And that's super good, because that means that their knowledge transfer, that is part of the concept. People from these big Western European publishing houses support then the publishing houses that are in the portfolio of Pluralis to, again, have a better path towards digitalization, to better business models, etc. They are investing in this knowledge transfer, and that's good. So there is an interest of return on investment, but it's of course not the main goal in this fund.
Before we come to questions, because I obviously there's a lot of expertise in the room, and I want to make sure that we draw on that, but do you have any other observations or sort of things that you want to add on and talk about before you get mauled by this very aggressive audience?
Maybe just one thing. I think, as we can also see with Pluralis, I think there's space for innovative financing models, because I mean, Pluralis offers investors a good return, but the companies themselves, they don't have to pay like a great interest, like a too high interest. So I think it's an innovative way of funding these, and I think there's room for experimentation, because so far we only see very few of these examples.
Right. And Martin, anything, or should we open up in here? So, questions. Okay, let's take 3 quickly, and then we'll. So 1, 2, 3.
Okay, can you please move this to the speaker? We'll answer.
Oh, sure.
It's a microphone.
Okay.
Whoever answers. I'll move it over here. You can just move it.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry.
Who was
Yes.
first?
Okay.
It's a mic.
Yeah. Here.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you for the good discussion.
This is like Star Trek.
So I'm working for the European Investment Fund. We invest in impact funds, and very interested by your initiatives. Can I ask, Sebastian, you mentioned, and interestingly, the extractive model of a VC that you're trying to avoid or build alternatives to with Karma Capital. So how do you do this, perhaps? In short, thanks.
So I don't know if everyone here knows how VCs are structured, venture capital, and like I mean, just one example. I think most venture capital firms have these carries, like carried interest, so which is a clear incentive for the management to create great returns, because then they get money themselves. And what we did with Karma Capital, so like the capital that is in Karma Capital is locked in, so it's a steward-owned company, so it's not like my personal, I don't own it personally, and it's not like I can't take any profits out, so it's like the structure is quite different. And now within this organization, we are going to start some funds. We don't know how to structure them exactly, like these, maybe that's getting too technical, how that can look like, but maybe we can discuss it later. But what we want to make sure is that within these funds, for instance, for media organizations, we don't want to create incentives for the people who work in the funds to create a lot of profit. We want to align the incentives with the impact we want to show. And that, I know that's quite abstract, but maybe the concrete answer is we don't want to duplicate these incentives of the traditional venture capital world, because I think...
Okay. And perhaps just to close, so you also expect to have some kind of time horizon within that, or also emancipate from the 10 years model?
I mean, I would like to create a revolving fund, so it has a really long-term perspective. And I mean, ideally, I will find funder, because we will also need funders at some point. And I would like to find funders who have a really long-term perspective, like more than 10 years. But of course, I also have to live with the reality on the market and see what people are willing to do. Like I can't tell my own funders long-term perspective, no return, and like you can never get any money back. I mean, there might be some people, but then the fund will be quite small, probably.
Thanks for sharing.
Thank you for the question.
Hey, hello. I don't know if it works. Just
Hold it here.
okay. Hey, my name is Stefan.
Don't eat it.
Sorry,
Don't eat it.
don't eat. No. My name is Stefan. I was working at the private equity impact investor previously, and I have a question to Sebastian. It's quite similar to yours. You said you want to make a difference with your business model at Karma Capital. I fully agree and understand a little bit, but probably I have also, I didn't get it right. You said you do not want to have control. This is the question, why do you do not want to have control? Because in my understanding, even you would have control, you do not need to make use of control as an investor or as an alternative investor. Could you help me to understand that better?
Yeah. And then you had a question. Anyone else? Or are we good for now and then we can come back? Yeah.
This is just my personal view. Like I have these two cases with Blinkist where like we had investors who had a lot of control and basically could tell us what to do. And then the last company I started, we used steward ownership as a ownership model where the control always remains inside the organization. So there's no external investor who has any voting rights. Which is, it's not socialism, so they still have, the economic rights. It's very clear what it means to have a non-voting share in our organization, and we can't take it away from them, for instance. But they don't have any say in decisions where the company goes to, and they can't fire the directors, for instance, which would have been possible at Blinkist. And I think especially in journalism, having investors who have control over the organization, that for me, it doesn't really work. I think the control over what the company does should remain within the organization. And I mean, of course, you can have, most of the investors are good and mostly they use their voting rights for the good, but you never know. And I think journalism, in my interpretation, is ideal when investors have no control over the organization. But yeah, this is a longer discussion, and I know that's only my opinion, so.
There is even a good example in the media world in Eastern Europe, Denik N in Slovakia, who also now is successfully in Czech Republic, and I know that they want to expand even further. They did exactly that when they went out from SME as a team of journalists when media capture happened for SME, which is now under pluralis protection, but 8 years ago it was different. They went out and funded a new newspaper the next day, and they had an investor, but this investor had no voting rights and could not influence. And actually, the Denik N is owned by the journalists, a bit like the Spiegel model also, and this shows that this can work very well in young media outlets.
And I think one of the, just before we come to your question, I think one of the interesting things is that I've been working on a lot in the last couple of years is that people are reconceptualizing what they mean by value. So value, I think, has really been one-dimensional. You know, and you in your respective domains will have seen many different ways of articulating what you mean by value. And, you know, whether you're talking about triple bottom line or, you know, any of these framings, it's now finding its way back out from journalism, where journalism is having to explain, well, look, yes, we have economic value because we are businesses and employers and we have an ecosystem around us of suppliers and so on. But we're also a sort of financial value thing because the information and the sort of institution we represent brings transparency to society, to markets, niche publications like trade journals and so on, look at particular sectors very forensically. And they're doing investigations and surfacing data. You look at the one Sifted that's looking at EU startup space. That could be very, very boring and very, yay and woo. Actually, they're looking very, very deeply at issues of injustice within the sector. It's the Financial Times set up Sifted. It's not we're not talking about something small, but they're trying to understand that all of these parts of journalism that contribute to society, they're starting to try and look at how they play a role and how you can begin to quantify those things. And it's not a purely financial transaction when you're investing. You're also investing in other kinds of value that have a return to society. It's obviously difficult to quantify some of them, but I think that is beginning to be factored into how people make financial investments and how the kinds of returns that different kinds of stakeholders are expecting.
Yes, thank you. Can you talk a bit about the business models? So I'm not a journalist, but when I look at the sector and I follow the startups, so what I see is that people are starting a media startup and they have a microphone for doing a podcast, you have like a newsletter, so it doesn't cost a lot of money. So you spend like 500 euros and then you're set up to start your business. And at the same time, you have a small team with 2, 3, 4 journalists. And I think that's it from my perspective. So what is the problem we're looking at? Is it a problem of the revenues, that you need the revenues? It can't be the costs. So can you talk a bit about the business models you're seeing outside of the print world? So like the new digital business models. And what do you expect to see in the next 10 years? And maybe the follow-on question is like, isn't it a reason to be optimistic about the field? Like you have a lot of journalists, you have a lot of like news options. And I feel that there's a lot of information out there. It's just like a question, how can you get information to the readers? Yes, but how is your view on the next 10 years? With a focus on the business models and the costs.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Well, I have actually a very optimistic view of the media world, but there will be a lot of change coming. For some of the news organizations, it will be very tough, and there is this transformation crisis already happening, and it will go on. Those who are willing to transform themselves and to take up new measures and ways how to actually do journalism and how to structure their organizations, they will win. And others might even die. Or some have already. So this is, but that's not like in the usual market setting where just old companies die, news come up. It's about democracy and journalism, and this is something very important to our society. So we really have to help these organizations who want to transform or who want to create something new to be able to come through on this very distorted market, because the media landscape is totally distorted by Google and Facebook, which take out most of the ad revenue. More than 50% of the ad revenue is just sucked out of this industry. And there are public organizations which are being funded by taxpayers' money and stuff like that. So it's really hard for a private news organization, even if you're a founder, it's even more harder, to gain traction, to come to a certain level of circulation of audience that you have a viable business model. And I hope that the fund and these initiatives will help these news organizations to come to this point where they can be viable themselves. And on your first question, I think it has never been so cheap to actually do journalism, because you don't need a big studio and you don't need to invest in buildings and whatever, and this satellite transfer cars and stuff like that. You don't need it anymore. But in order to do great investigative independent journalism, you need people, and this is very expensive. Most part of a news organization's budget is people, is expenses for wages. And so if you want to have relevance, and if you want to tell stories that people care for and actually pay for, you need people, and that costs money.
So, can I just check one thing? What time? How much time do we have?
6 minutes.
5 minutes. 6. Okay. Wow, that's a 20% increase. Okay, so can we come to you for a question, and then we'll and really, like.
I will keep it short.
Excellent.
I have a question that's kind of linked to what he was talking about, which is on business models. Are you seeing that there is an uplift in people actually wanting to pay for good news content and good journalism? And is this kind of investment that's being planned in a way to offset that as well?
Okay, and thank you, because that's very related to what I want to close with. So we've talked a lot about money. We've talked a lot about things, in a sense that are sort of decontextualized or depoliticized. We're also in an environment where Europe itself is diversifying. Populations, the composition of populations is changing. Right? And also we have incredible inequality in our societies that's in many senses growing since the financial crisis 15 years ago, COVID, et cetera, et cetera. So as you answer that, because of course, the sector has to wash its own face financially, right? In some sense, it's got to contribute to washing it. Maybe it needs some soap, I don't know. But there's also a societal mission, which is to reflect and engage with and elevate voices from across society, give access to, different kinds of voices, and also to try and counteract forces that are trying to increase inequality. At the same time as you're talking about, different kinds of capital, there's also information capital in society, and different people there's an information inequality, within the city, within the country at large, and in every society. So with that in mind, do you want to sort of close out, take a sort of minute or two each to take us home? Yeah.
Should I start?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think maybe one thing we didn't touch yet is, like, for me, if I look at the change in the last 20 years, I think it's pretty dystopian that we see now that so much traffic and so much of the money being made is going to a few big monopolistic companies. I think it's really dystopian, but I'm optimistic. So I think in 20 years we will have a totally different, we discussed about it yesterday, we will have a totally different media landscape again. And like, my hope from an investor's perspective is that I want to meet the people now who are, who want to be the future, like the companies who, when we don't talk about Facebook and Instagram and TikTok anymore in 20 years, what are the companies we will talk about? I think it will be more smaller ones. And I want to meet the people who start them now. And I think there are enough people who want to do it, who also have the know-how to do it. And I think one of the things they're lacking is capital. That's why we talked so much about money today. Who wants to go next?
And in terms of diversity and...
Yeah, that's the same. Like, of course, I don't want to found only like white German male media entrepreneurs. Like, it should be a more diverse crowd of people who run these organizations. Yeah.
To your question, I think the model has been for a while one size fits all. And to industrialize journalism in that way, so everyone just reads, gets the same information, the same stories. And now we see that our societies are getting much more diverse. And there is a big chance, because if a news organization focuses on a community and really engages with them, and really doesn't only report about them, but actually for them, they will gain a lot of trust in this community. And with trust, there also comes the money. There comes subscriptions, and then with these subscriptions and with the trust, there comes ad revenue, because other companies, they want to have access to this community. They want to communicate their messages through a trusted messenger with ads, and by that it's getting also a business model. So the hope is that with, and this will be done by the fund as well, there will be a special focus on underserved communities, by that to stimulate growth and more people trying to create something for special communities. And by that I hope it will kind of impact the whole industry.
I also would like to answer to your question a bit, maybe with some anecdotal stuff. So there are several examples where you can see that there is a dialectic relationship between pressure and independent journalism. There was the case, I mentioned it, 2018 with the murders in Slovakia. And after that, the independent media had a boost of subscriptions. So people not only went to the streets and kicked out more or less the government that is back now, but still at that time who was related. But the same people realized we need quality journalism, and we have to pay for it. In Slovakia was not the market where people were used to pay for online information content, and suddenly this continued. In Austria, we have an example that an independent investigative platform was threatened by a slap case by a very important energy company here in Austria, and this created actually an outrage, and they more than doubled their membership base. So there is this. I also would say I'm sometimes a pessimist, or I wake up at night and think, wow, what will be the future? But then again, I think no. But actually, these are the times when good stories are also. It's the time of good stories, and I think people get more and more aware that it's not only Spotify and Netflix they can pay, but also good quality information.
So I want to end with one also very good story, which maybe you could talk about. So one of your funders is Hans Schöpflin, and there's a parallel initiative in Berlin, which is a physical investment in the infrastructure and actually built environment. So maybe do you want to just talk about the Publics initiative and about Hans Schöpflin?
Yeah, Hans Schöpflin yesterday, he told us how he radicalized himself because he used to be a venture capitalist, and then he turned into this activist investor. I think that's how he described himself, and realized that if he wants to help democracy, he really needs to fund journalism. And he also realized that there's a moment of crisis, which also helps to actually steer and create the future and co-create it with the industry. And so he also decided to put a lot of money behind an initiative in Berlin, which is called Publics. And it's a house. I think it's a center for journalism where news organizations can come together. It's a shared office space, but it's also a community where people can mentor themselves, and there are community events, and it will be open up. I think this Friday will be kind of the soft launch, and in September it will be open up to the public. It's in Neukölln.
Okay, well, I guess they'll be happy to talk to you after. But in the meantime, can you thank them for their extraordinary insights?